Good morning. How's everybody doing today? Welcome to the broadcast. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Hello. All right. I hope my stream's coming through clear. Can everyone hear me pretty well? I hope so. Hi, Etta. Hi, Leanne. Hi, Tara. It's good to see you this morning. Thanks for making it. Glad you could make it. Good deal. All right. Hello, Ashley. Folks, Ashley came into the Thursday morning webinar and absolutely rocked it. That vibe was totally different. Ashley, you came in there and you were so talkative and interactive. She really led a resurgence in the Thursday morning crowd. I was really proud. So I know, Leanne, it is the hot rod you all know and love. It's good to see you. It's good to see you all. Fantastic. All right, so today's lecture, we're going to talk about some of the protective factors for stress. So if you remember, let's go back to the lecture here. So what we're going to talk about is what causes the feelings of stress, some coping strategies you might use for dealing with stress, some buffers against stress, and I'm going to talk a little bit about positive psychology, which is a scientific study of happiness. And then I'm going to give you rules for living a long and happy life. All right. Fantastic. All right, so here we go. One of the weird things you'll notice is that everybody responds differently to stress. Some of you don't have very stressful lives at all, and yet you always feel stressed out. And then some of you may be going to school, have 4 children, and a full-time job, and not feel stress at all. And what is it that makes some people able to handle stressful events and some people not able to handle stressful events? Now, in Hans Seeley's model, if you look at his model, it's very biological, and it suggests that we should all respond to stress the same exact way. So whenever something comes into your environment or my environment, it should raise our cortisol level, and it should stay high for a long time until our system goes into exhaustion, and then our immune system should be functioning should be decreased, but that doesn't happen for everybody. So what we need to do is we need to adjust this biological model to account for the factors that differentiate among people's different responses to stressful events. So here's the deal. If you remember, we talked about in Chapter 9, we talked about emotions, and I suggested to you that emotion was both a physiological response and also a cognitive label that you attach to that physiological response. You see, I've got the star here in the on the PowerPoint presentation, directing you to Chapter 9 in the classic theories of emotion. I don't know if you remember James Lang, the Cannon-Bard theory, Stanley Schachter's 2-factor theory of emotion, but all of them posit that the final emotion is not only a physiological response, but it's a cognitive label too. Stress is an emotional response. Don't fool yourself. Being stressed out is the same as having an emotional response. They are physiological and cognitive systems that activate your body and cause a cascade of physiological changes to occur. So what we need to do is we need to think about stress using the same concept as we do about emotions. It's not just the physiological arousal, but it's how you choose to label that physiological arousal. And so really one of the first theories to talk about this link between cognition and the final experience of stress was the Lazarus model right here. It's almost 60 years old. Now you can think about any sort of threatening environment as being something that could cause physiological arousal or the experience of stress. Think about harm, threat, or a challenge that you might meet. And every stress that you meet in your day-to-day experience poses you harm, poses you threat, or poses some sort of challenge that your system has to overcome. What Lazarus suggested was that the difference between people who experience stress and people who don't experience stress is that some people have the ability to engage in a secondary appraisal of their stress that gives them power. So he argues that the stress experience, we go through two sort of appraisals, cognitive appraisals, when a stressful event comes into our life. The first is a primary appraisal. We have to deem it somehow threatening or challenging or dangerous to you. So our primary appraisal is whether or not something poses a threat or whether or not it's a neutral experience. Now, if something is perceived as threatening, challenging, or harmful, we then go into a secondary appraisal. And he says it's this secondary appraisal that differentiates those who had the final stress experience and those who don't. In the secondary appraisal, you, as an organism, make the judgment, do I have the resources to deal with this threat or challenge? And if you feel like you can cope with this event, then you have a minimum level of stress. On the other hand, when some people perceive these threats, they feel unprepared to deal with these threats. And it's this lack of preparation, this lack of control, this lack of coping that leads people to experience the stressful situation. So, for example, some of you probably have very stressful weeks ahead of you. You have 2 papers to do and study for an exam, and you still have to take care of your 2 children. Holy cow, that's a lot of stress. That is definitely a threat or a challenge to you this week. But some of you feel like you can cope with it. I can do this, man. I can do this. And you people aren't going to experience as much stress as those of you who say to yourselves, I can't do it. This is too overwhelming, right? And so there you go. Leanne's talking about a threatening experience. Now, what's the secondary appraisal, Leanne? Okay, so the storm is coming and it's going to knock out power. That is definitely a challenge. Now, what's your belief about that? Do you feel like you can adapt? Can you get along in a dark house, still get to work, still feed yourself? Or do you feel like it's going to leave you unprepared and you're not going to be able to meet this challenge? If you don't feel like you're going to meet the challenge, then you're more likely to experience the emotional arousal and the sympathetic nervous effect that we talked about on Tuesday. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, that's sort of a general model that suggests that really it's all in the mind in terms of whether or not we experience a stressful experience as being stressful to us. Okay, right. You do need the webs for school. And if that knocks us out, then we are SOL. Right. There you go. That's a good point, Ash. Unless you had the kind of relationships with your teachers where you felt confident that your teachers would work with you, right? So some of you probably believe in the Wake Tech system and feel like your teachers would accommodate you if something like that happened, and you'd have a sense of control so it wouldn't stress you out. Others of you who maybe don't have as good a relationship with your instructor might feel that if the power goes out, you will fail your assignments because your teachers won't give you extensions, right? Exactly, Leanne. And I think that's why it's important to meet your teachers face to face like we are doing right now. Because if you can see my facial expressions, see the smile on my face, remember emotions from chapter 9, I believe you can start to make guesses about how I would act in different situations. And that leads to a certain interrelational comfort that we have. So I think that's one of the things that's actually missing in an online class. Students feel a little bit stressed and threatened in their classes because they don't interact with their teachers and they don't develop a comforting social support. If you'll notice down here, I have social conditions as sort of a mediating factor of whether or not you experience stress. Okay? Facts, Keelan. It's so funny. It's sort of a generational thing. I hadn't even thought about charging my phone at this point, but that's the first thing on the millennial mind. Got to have that technology charged up. That's why you'll be able to contact people after the storm goes out, and I'm going to be wandering around my house lonely. Okay, so here's the thing. Many factors determine whether threat, harm, or challenge lead to the final experience of stress. And we're going to call these things mediating factors. Mediation is a statistical term where you can decide whether or not a factor in between two variables is responsible for the relationship between those two variables. So mediation and moderation basically is another way of talking about something that's in the middle that causes a relationship between two events. So the relationship between stress and your stress response depends upon different qualities. And let's group into three basic qualities. There's personality styles that determine how you respond to stress. There are strategies that you can work on and learn that will help you deal with stress. And then part of your social fabric is going to determine how you deal with stress. Okay, so it depends on several different factors. So some of you who are better at dealing with stress, maybe you have the personality characteristics that make you better at dealing with stressful responses. Maybe you've practiced, your parents taught you coping strategies that allowed you to deal with stress in a more productive manner. And maybe you have a lot of friends and you go to church and you have events that take in social groups that protect you from the effects of stress. And some people don't deal with stress as well, and they may not have these protective factors. Okay? So let's talk about these mediating factors. The first is personality styles. And actually there's research sort of with three different populations showing how different types of personality styles relate to stress. I don't know if any of you ever heard of being a type A personality. Anybody ever heard of a type A personality before? I'd be curious. Is anybody here a type A personality? Tara, you seem type A-ish a little bit. Okay, all right. Well, this doctor in the 60s, Dr. Roseman, noticed this really interesting. He was a heart doctor, and he noticed this really interesting pattern between his patients. He had certain patients that would come extra early, that would sit and pace and fidget in the waiting room, and tended to be more emotional. And he noticed that there were some patients that were like that, and then there's some patients that weren't. And what he noticed was that the patients that were fidgety, came early, and were kind of emotional tended to come back with heart problems more often than other patients. And he began to wonder if there was some sort of personality difference which could differentiate these types of personalities. And so this guy, Dr. Rosenman, came up with the Type A personality scale. And basically, he argued and showed that there are three basic personality qualities that you'll see in people we call Type A personalities, and that Type A personalities are more likely to have stress-related medical illnesses. So, Type A people are very impatient and always in a hurry with a great sense of urgency. He noticed these Type A patients were also super duper competitive and achievement oriented. Ashley, Tara, sounds like you two, right? Do I know you well enough to say that you both have those qualities? I can definitely tell you're very achievement-oriented students, right? Etta, you know what? You strike me as probably a person who's maybe competitive and impatient. Yes. Right? Now, there's a third quality, and this actually turns out was the real risk factor within the Type A personality, and it's a certain degree of hostility and aggressiveness. Are you also an angry person that loses your temper really easily? If you have sort of this hostile personality style within the Type A orientation, you're really at risk for more cardiovascular related events. Okay, right, I didn't think so. And that's sort of the difference. You can be competitive, but it's when you have that anger going on too. Does any of you know a Type A person who's impatient, competitive, and extremely hostile and angry? Anybody know a Type A personality? Unless you're playing basketball, there you go. Tara Solomon, thug life there. She's doing it on the court. Don't get in her way. My grandpa, right, right. Your cousin. It's me. There you go. A little self disclosure from Keelan. Okay, that's funny. All right, so that's one personality style that's associated with health related and stress related problematics. Now, a fellow named Kobasa in the late 70s looked at business executives and their ability to handle stressful events without getting sick as well. And he found, he described a quality which he called psychological hardiness. Okay, psychological hardiness. Now, when bad things happened to these people, they responded differently than people who didn't have this psychological hardiness. So the thing is, he found that these business executives that had a commitment to what they were doing, that really believed in what they were doing, had psychological hardiness. And these business executives also saw things, changes and problems as challenges rather than threats. All right, so it wasn't a threat as much as it was an opportunity to overcome something. And these business managers that handled stress better and lived healthier had a sense of control. So he argued that psychological hardiness is sort of this state where you're really into what you're doing. You believe in what you're doing. The challenges that you see don't bother you. They're not threats. They're challenges to you. And you feel sort of a sense of control. And this quality is what we would call psychological hardiness. Now, for some people, they don't buy into what they're doing. If you don't believe and you're not committed to what you're doing, it's harder to deal with the challenges that occur in your particular domain. Sometimes I've noticed, Ashley, you were talking about in webinar this morning, you were talking about the fact that you're paying for your education now. So dadgummit, it's your A and you are going to get it. That is a kind of a sense of commitment right there to your education that I notice differentiates a lot of students in my class. Not to type any of you students, but I sometimes notice that my 18, 19-year-old students, sometimes they're not as hardy in class and responding to challenges, and it's because I don't think they have their own skin in the game. But I get the same student back I've been doing this long enough to see students twice, and what I see is when they come back at 26 and 27 and 28 and they're paying for their education on their own, totally different person. There's nothing I can throw in front of them that they can't overcome. And I think it's because of this. Oh, Leanne, I think you're wonderful, and we were all 18 at one time. And I'm making generalizations, but take them lightly. Don't take them to heart. It's just I've noticed that sometimes, there's a certain wonderful youthfulness that sometimes doesn't work in educational settings. So I was 18 too. Riley, Keelan, they were all, Ashley, she was 19 once, I think. I pay for my school, so I have a different approach to school than I used to have. There you go. All right, and it feels the same way. Now, another personality style is what we could say, how many of you feel like you're an optimistic kind of person? Anybody an optimist out there? Do you see the glass as half full or half empty? A fellow named Seligman found that he studied college students, and he found that there were personality styles which would also predict their level of stress and health-related outcomes. And he sort of looked at he looked at a concept he called learned optimism. Now, he started out as a young researcher looking at learned helplessness. He sort of came from the behavioral tradition, but he became interested in this concept he called learned optimism. And what he argued is that some people develop an explanatory style, a way of explaining the outcomes in their life that is optimistic. And some people develop what you might call a pessimistic explanatory style. And he said it differed in how they explained the successes in the failures in their life. So when something good happens, how do you explain it? Do you say that this thing happens all the time, or do you say you got lucky? If you say it happens all the time, you have a sense of permanence in the good things that happen in your life. When something good happens to you, you say, wow, this is the only good thing that's ever happened to me. Or do you say, wow, this is just one of the lots of good things that happens to me? That is, how pervasive is this positive thing in your life? And when something good happens to you, do you think it's because of something you did? Or do you think it's because you got lucky somehow or somebody wasn't paying attention? How personal was this outcome? And what he found was that learned optimists tend to view positive events as more permanent, pervasive, and personal. That is, they saw it as happening frequently, happening in different areas of their life, and a result of their actions. And he's found that these optimists, when they failed at things, they didn't see them as permanent, pervasive, or they didn't take them personally. On the other hand, pessimists tended to have the exact opposite pattern. They would see their failures as permanent, pervasive, and as a result of their own failures. So the question is, what type of person are you? Are you an optimist, or are you a pessimist? I'm sorry, I've just seen a question come up from Riley C., which I think is very interesting. Hardiness, yes. I would say any engaging in a physical exercise routine, trying to change your BMI, trying to lose weight, trying to change your body shape, requires a certain amount of challenge, right? It's stressful, getting to the gym every day, being motivated enough to do it, working through the pain. Absolutely, Riley. And there are some people who have sort of this hardiness or this optimism that working out will work. And this sort of allows them to fight through the challenges in life. One way you can meet a challenge, we'll talk about it, I think, in a little bit. One way you can deal with the stress is trying to forget about it. And sometimes that's useful, but a lot of times you have to meet stress head on and challenges head on if you want to beat them. And so doing anything difficult, like going to school, like working out, it all depends upon your hardiness. I have some students that drop my class when something starts happening at home, and other students are able to fight through those stressful events. And it all depends upon your orientation towards stress. Well, good. I hope you change your thinking. Now, what... No, you're brilliant. Thank you for the lead in, Riley. You're helping me out here. Now, here's the deal. What you need to do is learn how to be more optimistic and view things in positive lights rather than negative lights. And so a model that kind of comes out of Seligman is what we'll call the ABDCE model. And this is what you should practice. This is a habit you can practice. And don't worry that you don't do it every time. If you do it once today or once this week and then twice the next week, you can build this into a habit, and I promise it will help you lead a less stressful life. So if we could real quick, I'd like to go to the whiteboard here. Okay, now it's changing your explanatory style, and I've got the mnemonic here. It's the ABCDE model. Now, we all have activating events that cause us to cause our blood pressure to rise. We have learned beliefs about these events that then lead to consequences. Okay, does that make sense? So for me, one of the things that we have to do in college is get into committees. You have to be engaged in committees work. And every college professor will tell you the same thing. They hate committees. They hate committees. I hate committees too. Because in committees, we always have to do what's known as a faculty project, right? And no matter how cool the idea starts out, once you have 30 faculty members weigh in with their opinion on that product will inevitably become this fine piece of French furniture I like to call garbage, right? And whenever I get involved in working hard on something that is going to inevitably be garbage, I always get super duper frustrated, right? So do you see how if I was a pessimistic person, having to work on faculty projects would cause me a great deal of frustration and stress in my job? Does that make sense? Well, here's what we're going to do. And when that happens, I get like, I just can't believe it. You see my mad face, right? And you don't want to see my mad face because that's not a happy thing, right? So what I want to do is try to stay out of that negative, stressful zone. Okay? Right. So here's the deal. Right? You don't want to see the mad face. And I am one of those people, they say, who wears his emotions on his sleeves. So when I start to get frustrated and pissed, it becomes apparently obvious, which is not good for me professionally. So let's go back to this model. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to learn to dispute our beliefs. We're going to learn how to dispute our belief. Now, my belief is that this project is going to turn out garbage. But you know what? That's not the only reason. That's not the only reason we do this project. You know what? Doing this project, aside from creating an educational activity, you know what I'm really doing? I'm getting to fellowship with my faculty members. Do you see how that sounds much better? Instead of getting frustrated because we're creating garbage, we are fellowshipping with faculty, right? So instead of you get, oh, this is cool. And that is how you dispute a belief. And then you know what? Because I have disputed that belief, I now feel energized. And you know what? I work hard and smile. And if you work hard and smile, then good things happen at work. And you don't get as stressed out. Oh, it's so loud in your headphones. I am super sorry, Aaron. I'm going to get sued for damaging my students' hearing. Can you actually be a realist? Explain, Keelan. Well, here's the thing, though. I am being a realist because if you think about it, that project is giving me an opportunity to fellowship with my faculty. Yes, we're creating garbage. No, I'm never going to actually use this in my class. But you know what? I got to spend time talking with my friends Kim and my friend Tom. And, we got to spend some quality time together. That's realistic, don't you think? And if I focus on that aspect of it, then I don't get as stressed. My best friend says she's a realist. I try to see with less emotion, positive or negative. Okay, that's cool too, as long as it works for you and it keeps your blood pressure down. Now, here's what I want you to do, folks. The next time something frustrates you in the next 24 hours, because it's going to happen, I want you to stop, think about me, think about my angry face, right? And try not to experience that. Go in and dispute that belief and see if you can find a positive spin on whatever's happening to you and see if it helps you. Okay? You're probably good. And if that changes your emotion, that's fabulous, right? Now, coping with stress involves a conscious effort to solve the problems in an effort to minimize your stress and conflict. So we need to deal with the stress. And what I'm talking about, a learned optimism, is a coping strategy. Ego resilience is a coping strategy. Avoiding a type A personality style is a coping strategy. And coping is whatever helps you deal with the stress. And Lazarus talked about two kinds of coping. And in Wednesday, I asked you folks how you dealt with stress, and I got lots of different answers, but your answers all fell into one of two categories. Some of you tried to fix the problem, okay, by talking the problem out with your friends, passing that class, figuring a way out to earn money so that you didn't kicked out of your apartment even though you lost your job. So some of you talked about fixing the problem, and that's one way we can deal with stress, is to fix the stressor. And then a lot of you talked about doing something to take your mind off of the stress. You either exercise, you did yoga, you did meditation. Quite a number of you said you drank wine to relieve stress. Some of you played video games. I think Michael Kirko talked about walking his dog. And all of you had different ways of just redirecting your mind from the stressful event. We'll call that emotion-focused coping, right? And so each and every one of you every day has two ways of dealing with stress. You can change the emotion about it, or you can try to solve that problem. You know what? Some of you talked about even using support. So you said you talked to your friends and that made you feel better about your problems. You know what? Lazarus didn't necessarily talk about that, but that's another way to get support. Just talking through your problems sometimes makes you feel good. And then you know what? Sometimes if you can make meaning in the suffering, right? If you can figure that you're suffering for a reason, that helps you. That makes it easier to deal with stress. So all of these are different coping mechanisms that we can use. Now, what are ways that we shouldn't cope with we shouldn't try to cope with our stresses? You know, one way that you do not want to do it is by pretending there isn't a problem. If you're going to try to avoid things that stress you out, you're not going to help yourself out at all. This is not going to lead in a decrease of stress. If you have problems, you can't just avoid them forever. Some people also engage in safety behaviors. Maybe they eat or they drink too much, or they engage in other sort of anxiety-reducing compulsive behaviors. Again, not a great strategy. And then you know what? Sometimes people just won't admit the things that are bothering them. They lie to themselves about why things are bothering them. This is called rationalization. So it's really better that you learn how to sometimes direct yourselves away from the stress of events, but then most of the time you want to meet them head on. So when you have a temporary problem, emotion-based coping might be the best way to do it. So if my mother-in-law comes in for the weekend and she starts annoying the hell out of me, you know what? Maybe I will have a couple of drinks or go for a jog or just put my headphones on and listen to some music and try to forget her annoying the hell out of me, right? But if you're failing a class, you can't just forget about it. You have to come up with a problem-solving approach to get through that problem. So what I want you folks to do is to know when to use problem-based focused and emotion-based focusing. When you have short-term stress, maybe you redirect yourself away, like you talked about in webinar. But when you have a big problem that's causing stress that you can't get around, that's going to eventually affect your life, you have to learn how to deal with that problem. And you have to learn how to have the confidence to deal with that problem. Now, what does this all mean? If you would that make you feel more stress, absolutely. And then you know what? Having people around definitely helps people deal with stress. One of the difficult parts about the pandemic this year is that we've all been isolated from the people and the friends and the family that can help us to feel better, right? So it's sort of weird. Not only are we having all the stress associated with the economy closing down, but we can't even talk to our friends to help us get through it. So your book talks about the value of social support and relationships, and it focuses on two major areas, sort of relationships with your romantic partners and spirituality. So it sort of talks about both of these. So I want to talk about them briefly. Now, having good relationships, yes, Etta, I know that, but you you do need to. Oh, okay. All right, I'm not following Edda's text. I'm trying to talk and I don't know what Edda's quite said, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut rather than misperceive what she said. So having good relationships sort of gives you two benefits. Not only is it cool that you know that other people care, but you know what? Other people can help you out. If you've ever tried to raise kids, balance kids with school and work, you know that it's great to have a mom or a dad or a family member who can occasionally give you some support in those daily living tasks. And it's also just cool to know that people care. Now, one of the most important relationships that you can have, and you know what? I wrote marriage up there. I should not have written marriage up there. Well, actually, the research does compare people who are legally bound with people who are just cohabitating. So that's why I kept that in there. But please don't take this as a judgment that one should or should not get married. Really, I think a lot of the benefit comes from just having a romantic partner that you're coupled with. I hope I backpedaled enough on that one. Okay, so good marriages do provide a buffer against poor health. So if you look at this chart right here, they looked at people's, the percentage of people who reported being in poor or fair health over different age groups. And what you're going to find is that being married leads to the lowest level of reporting yourself as being in poor or fair health. And you see people who are divorced and separated, you're going to see that their rates are a little bit higher. And so what they suggest is that bad marriages, so not being in a relationship is good if it's a good relationship. But being in a bad relationship is also as damaging. So should I stay married? Well, it depends. You should definitely stay married in a good marriage. But if there's lots of emotional trauma, then maybe your health benefits would be served by not being in that unhealthy relationship. And bad marriages and people in divorced, bereaved singles do show compromised immune systems compared to people who are coupled successfully. Now, right underneath me, we also talk about spirituality. And you know what? I believe spirituality, a lot of the benefits of spirituality are that you find yourself in a group of people. So people who are religious report more well-being. So one of the things that they look at, especially in developmental psychology involved in looking at older people, what they find is that as you get older, people who are more religious do report more well-being. They feel better, they think better, they're happier. And you know, the thing is, it doesn't matter what religion it is. It doesn't matter what religion it is. So if you ask me why I think spirituality is good for your health, I'm going to say that it gives you a sense of social support. It puts you in a community of people who are involved in caring for one another. And that's what we need as a protective factor against stress. Number two, religious groups tend to promote healthy behaviors, right? Not drinking, not engaging in crazy aggressive behavior, trying to be peaceful and happy. So they promote sort of healthy behaviors. And religion also gives us a sense of meaning. Or if you go back, that's the same concept really as what the ego resilience was looking at when they were talking about a sense of commitment. So a sense of meaning, a reason to get up every day. I'm living for whatever DT's will every day. I'm trying to become one. We have a sense of purpose for getting up every day. So religion also provides a buffer against stress. So let me quickly bounce back and say, so we've got these different kinds of stressors that affect us. Major life stressors, daily hassles, negative, positive, beating on you every day. Trying to arouse your emotional response, that is stress. But you can You can determine whether or not these things that beat on you every day cause you to experience the negative effects of stress. It will depend on your personality strategies, whether you're a pessimist, whether or not you have ego resilience, or whether you're a type A person. It also depends upon the coping strategies that you engage in. Do you learn how to use the ABCDE model? Do you know when to use problem versus focused coping versus emotion-based coping? And do you have the right social group to help mediate the negative effects of stress? And all of these things are going to determine the level of stress that you affect and how it affects you. And so what I want you to do is to think about these factors as you move forward and try to position yourself as a person who is immune to the negative effects of stress, just like Dr. Kelly McGonigal said in her TED Talk. Any questions? Okay, now, your book talks in this section a little bit about a branch of psychology called positive psychology. Very different approach to psychology, and positive psychologists are actually interested in studying happiness scientifically. So if you look around at psychology, a lot of it's pretty negative. Clinical psychology is about people who have psychological disorders. Sigmund Freud thought that everybody was driven by conflict and sexual conflict in their brain. The behaviorists thought we were animals. That's not a very happy thing. Biological psychologists looked at people's brain damage. Nobody really studies happiness. So starting in the 60s and 70s, psychology became interested in the scientific study of happiness and well-being. And that branch of psychology is now known as positive psychology. So it's an approach to psychology that focuses on the scientific study of well-being. I'm going to use the term well-being instead of happiness because well-being is also physical health. So physical health, positive happiness, which is positive emotion, engagement in life, and finding meaning in life. All of these things are in what we call well-being. And if you look at people who are really, truly have well-being in your life, you'll notice that they're physically healthy, they're happy, they're engaged with their job, and they have a reason to get up every day. And that's what we should all strive for, a sense of well-being. Now, I want you to know that well-being is actually studied scientific internationally now. In fact, the leader of Bhutan coined this term, the General National Happiness Index. Instead of national product, the gross national product, he invented the term gross national happiness as one way of measuring the success of a society. So we can look at countries and look at how much money they generate and say this country is more successful than that country. But the leader of Bhutan said, no, let's actually look at gross national happiness, because really what's most important is not money, but happiness. And if you'll look down below me, you will see the list of countries with the highest gross national happiness across the country. And you can see all the factors that go into creating gross national happiness. It's life expectancy, it is money, it's how nice people are, and it's all of these other things. So there's a ton of different factors that grow into gross national happiness. Now, if you look down here at the other side of the screen, you'll notice that they even look at well-being in the United States here, and you should notice that the upper Midwest and western part of the country is the happiest and healthiest part of the United States. Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, Colorado. And if you look at those states with the lowest well-being, it seems to be all of those states along the Mississippi River. Kind of interesting, isn't it? No Poland here. No, I'm sorry, Etta. I'm not sure where Poland is. The index can be found online, so you should go find Poland and see where your country is on it. So So it's interesting, right? And so remember, well-being is associated with stronger immunity, fewer illnesses, and a longer life. And so it's very interesting, this idea of cultivating well-being, and you folks should definitely attempt to do that. And what I'm going to ask you, if you look down here in the bottom left-hand corner, I have a TED Talk video for you in your course resources by Dan Gilbert. He's a very famous positive psychologist, and he has a 30-minute TED Talk called Happiness, What Your Mother Didn't Tell You. And he provides a great introduction into the scientific study of well-being and happiness. And he's a fabulous speaker who tells lots of jokes. Please, please, please take the time to watch Dan Gilbert's talk. And I'm going to leave you with the advice of my grandmother-in-law, my wife's grandmother, Nana. Nana turned 100 years old last spring, and she still lives by herself. She still drives a car. She still takes care of herself. She even has 3 rental properties that she still manages. This lady is the baddest woman I have ever met at 100 years old. I aspire to be like Nana. And if you want to live to be 100, you need to follow Nana's 8 rules for living to 100, okay? Now, she's a country lady from deep in the middle of North Carolina, so she speaks with a little accent. So she'd say, eat your greens, honey, eat your greens. Get yourself outside. No smoking and no drinking. Join yourself a bingo league. Go to prayer meeting at least twice a week. Find you a sweet patootie to kiss on. And remember, you can't run from your troubles, and it takes more muscles to frown than it does to smile. And if you follow those 8 rules, you will live to be 100 just like my Nana. So, do any of you have any questions? Do you want to see my angry face again? Or not? Okay, folks, that is the end of the lecture. I hope you don't mind me keeping you here so long. Oh, we're still booing. I forgot to turn off that sound effect. Oh, so it did boo every time I put it on there? Fabulous. Sweet, sweet, sweet. Okay, folks. Well, that's all I have to say. If anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to sit. I'm going to stay here and text in the chat bar for a couple of minutes. Or if you have a question, send me a remind text. Neuromatrix number 11 will be available tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And don't forget to do the discussion board so you can get credit or extra credit for the weekly collaboration activity. If you folks don't have any questions, I will say goodbye, and I will see you next Tuesday. Take care.